This is a tutorial on how to navigate the basics of the Tinkercad work area. Tinkercad is an online piece of software that can be used for making simple 3D models for output to either 3D printers or output to a laser cutter. After you set up your Tinkercad account and you start a new file, you'll be presented with a work area in the browser that looks like this. So the first thing to make note of is up in the left-hand corner, it gives your file a name. So it's going to name it some kind of nonsense word. So in this case, Glorious Jarve. If you want to change that name, double click on the name and it will become highlighted blue, and then you can name it whatever you'd like. So in this case, I'm going to name it Project 1 Test. So there's various different tools that you're going to find in your work area. On the left, you have a series of tools that help you with navigation. So a little toolbar. You have a little widget that looks like a cube that allows you to manipulate the 3D space, and I'll demonstrate that more in a second. On the right-hand side, you have a toolbox with some primitive shapes. So a cube, a cylinder, a sphere, etc. And then this blue area represents your work area. And so what you're looking at is you're looking at the 3D work plane. Other thing to make note of is that by the bottom right-hand corner of your work plane, you have a little input where you can edit the grid. So if you click on that, it will let you edit the grid to different measurements. But we actually want to change that measurement. So if you hit the Edit Grid button, it'll let us change the units. We want to change those units to inches. That'll make more sense to us. You can also change the size of your work area. So we can change that to maybe 10 inches by 10 inches, or you could do 12 inches by 12 inches, or whatever suits your fancy. If you hit the Update Grid button, now we have a larger grid. We also have a grid that is laid out in inches instead of millimeters. You can go back to that same little menu, and you can see that we now have choices that are in inches. So you can set these presets to change the number of grids in your work area grid. So for example, you could set it to half-inch grids, or you could set it to quarter-inch grids, or whatever. I'm going to stick with half-inch. Okay, so once you start to make something, you're going to basically build it from primitives. So over in your right-hand side, we'll just start with something simple. So maybe I'll just bring out the cube. So you bring that out of the toolbox by dragging on it and then releasing the mouse where you want to place it, and it places the cube in the work area. Now once you do that, you'll get another dialog box that gives you some information about that particular primitive shape. So in this case, you can make it a solid shape, or you can make a shape that essentially is a void or a hole. And I'll demonstrate that in a little bit later. Right now, let's stick with a solid shape. For the solid shape, it's going to default to a certain color, in this case red. If you single click on the red circle, it'll bring up a palette where you can change this. So let's say that I decide that I'd rather this was blue. So I could change it to blue. Now, you also have control over whether the shape has a radius on its edges. So if you give it a radius, it'll kind of have rounded edges. no radius, or a radius of 0 will give you sharp edges. You can change the number of steps. Now that's not going to do anything in this case. So that's more for shapes that have a curved surface like a cylinder. You can change the length. So the length is 1. So in this case, 1 inch. The width is 1 inch. The height is 1 inch. And if you change any of those, you can make this so it's not a cube any longer, right? It's still a rectilinear object, but it's not a perfect cube. So in this case, that has a length of 3, a width of 1, and a height of 1. And once you get that outputs how you want it, if you just click in your work area in empty space anywhere on the grid, that little dialog box with the inputs for the shape will disappear. If you want that dialog box to appear again, double click on the shape, and then the dialog box with the properties for that shape will appear again. Let's go up and, well, let's put one more shape out here. So maybe let's put a cylinder. So I'll bring a cylinder over and place it in my work area. Now this will show you how that sides function works. So for the cylinder by default, it has 20 sides, but we can increase that. And so if I can increase that to say, 40 sides, basically what that means is you'll have a smoother curve, and you won't see the faceted faces that are creating that curve as much. Okay, so let's talk about the little navigational widget. So up in the left-hand corner, you have this cube that's labeled with top, front, side, back, etc. And that lets you navigate your work area. So if you click on it and drag, you'll see that the work area will drag accordingly. So if you move it to the front, you'll see the shapes in your work area from the front. If you click and drag around to the left, you'll see them from the left. If you drag up to the bottom, you'll see them from the bottom. Drag so that you can see the top, you'll see them from the top, right? So you can change the angle of your work area so you can see what you're working on from different points of view. The other way to navigate this little widget, instead of clicking and dragging it, you can just click on the view that you want. So if you click on the top view, it'll take you to the top view automatically. So I'm just single clicking on it. If you click on the right view, it'll take you automatically to the right view. And you might have to click and drag so that you can see the plane that you want to go to. So in this case, I clicked and dragged so I could see the word back, then click on back, and it will show me the back view. Okay, so as you're working with things, if you want to combine shapes, you can drag these shapes so that they overlap. So if I wanted to combine these two shapes, hold the Shift key and click the blue rectilinear shape so that both shapes are selected. And then up here where I'm pointing with my mouse, you have a group and an ungroup button. So notice that the ungroup button is grayed out because nothing's grouped. The shortcut for that is Control-G for group and Control-Shift-G for ungroup. If you hit the little button, that will group those two together. Now notice that the whole it's a single shape now made out of those two shapes, right? So if I manipulate my navigation widget, you can see that it's combined those. So they're a single object. You can tell that because they're a single color, so they're orange in this case. If you wanted to change that color, you can come back up here to the color picker area, right, where it says solid. Click on that, which brings up your presets, and then just pick a different color. So maybe I want this to be purple. If you have things that are grouped and you want to ungroup them, select them, come up to the ungroup button, or use the shortcut Control-Shift-G. And so that ungroups them, and now they're two separate objects. The other thing that you can do is you can use one object to cut a hole through another object. So if I click in the grid space to deselect both objects, and then I reselect the cylinder, that will open up the properties for that cylinder. And instead of defining it as a solid, define it as a hole. And so now you can see that it's basically cut that shape out of, you're still going to be able to see it, okay? So you still get this kind of gray translucent visibility for a hole, but basically it's cut a semicircular hole into the blue box. So if you no longer want an object to function as a whole, select it by single clicking it. The shape properties appear. Basically just change it back to solid, and it'll be a solid shape. And if you want to delete that shape with it selected, just hit delete on your keyboard. And it should delete that shape. If you want to lock a shape so that it can't be edited, in your shape dialog box, there is a little lock that is open. The shortcut for that is Control-L. If you click it so that the lock becomes closed, then that object is no longer editable until you unlock it. If you need to edit the object again, go up to your little lock and click it again. It'll open the lock, and now you notice that your variables are available for the object, so you can change it and manipulate it, or you could move the object by clicking on it and dragging. Let's delete this. So let's hit delete, and if we go back to our tool box of primitives, which is over here on the right, let's get a box and bring it out again. Now you'll notice that when you select the box or any of the primitive shapes, it'll show you these little handles. So these squares that appear on the corners of the object are handles, and those handles control the scaling of this object. So if I wanted to make the object smaller or larger, when I click on those handles, you'll see that it's giving me this little diagram that shows me that this is 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. Well, if I select on one of those inches by clicking on it, I could put in 2 and hit return. And so now this is no longer a cube, it's a box, but it's now 2 inches long, 1 inch wide, and 1 inch tall. So again, I can click on one of those corner handles, and I could make this 2 by 2 by 1. So put in a 2 for the width and hit return on the keyboard. And so now the object is 2 inches wide, 2 inches long, and 1 inch tall. You can also change the size of it by simply clicking and dragging from one of the corners. So now this is 1 inch tall by 4 inches by 4 inches, or now it's 1.5 inches by 1 inches by 3.5 inches. So that's the way that you can rescale something. Now it's 1 inch tall by 1/2 inch deep and 1/2 inch wide. If you don't want it to sit on the plane, you have this cone that's on top of the object, And if you click that and drag, it will pull the object up off the plane. Notice that the diagram on the right is showing me how far I've pulled it up off of the plane. So now it's floating 2 inches above the plane. So that you have a visual indication that something's floating, you get a shadow. If you come over here to the left-hand side underneath your navigation widget, you have a little toolbar that helps you with some other navigation tasks. So for example, if you want to zoom in, you can hit the circle with a plus sign in it. If you want to zoom out, you can click on the circle with a minus sign on it. If you want to fit your view, you can click the second little button, which has a square in it, and that basically fits your object that you're working on into the view. And then finally, at the bottom, you can switch to orthographic view. So basically what that's going to do is it's going to eliminate the perspective so that you can work on this without the interference of perspective. You can probably see this better if we go to top view. Right, so this is with perspective, and then if I click the orthographic view, that's without perspective. That's really useful when you're trying to do something mathematically to get something positioned right. But then you want to switch it to the perspective view so that you can see what that object is going to look like in space. All right, so it's really important to switch between the orthographic view and the perspective view. The last button in this little toolbar is the little home button. So if you click that, it'll basically return you to the default position that the screen was in before you started manipulating anything. Let's bring the box back out. So we went over how to scale this object, but what if you want to rotate the object? So to rotate the object, let's zoom in a little bit. So I'm going to go over to the zoom in button, zoom in so we can see the box a little better. As you're moving your mouse over the object, right, you move it down to this double-headed arrow, right? So there's one kind of at the bottom of the object. There's one that's at the top of the object. So the one at the bottom of the object is going to rotate it around its vertical axes. The one that's at the top of the object is going to rotate it around its horizontal axes, right? So notice that those look like a compass rose, right? And they have degrees on them. So this is set to 0 degrees. Both of these are at 0 degrees now. So if I click that and rotate, I could rotate this to 45 degrees. So I've rotated that around its vertical axis 45 degrees. Let's undo that. Command Z will undo anything. So it's good to know. So Command Z will undo the last thing that you just did. If I wanted to rotate this around its horizontal axes, I'd use the double-headed arrow at the top. Click that, you see this compass rose that appears, right? And I can rotate this to negative 45 degrees along a horizontal axis, right? And if I release, now I kind of have this cube sitting up on point. So that's basically how you rotate something. Now you can rotate it obviously using both widgets, right? So I could rotate it 45 degrees horizontally and then also 45 degrees, vertically. So now this is kind of, standing up like a diamond, if you will. So that's basically how you rotate things. The next thing that you might want to do, let me delete this object just by selecting it by clicking on it and hit the delete key. I'm going to bring out a box, and let's say that I want to make a duplicate of that. To make a duplicate of it, you can come up here above where your navigation widget is, and you have this icon that looks like two squares sitting on top of each other. That will copy whatever you currently have selected, and the shortcut for that is Control C. So if I click that, it copies the cube. To paste the cube, you go to the next icon, which looks like a clipboard, and the shortcut for pasting is Control V. And if I click that, it'll paste the cube. So now I have two cubes. If I pull this one over, you'll be able to see that that's the case. So there's two cubes. You can also trash something if you don't want to use the delete key on the keyboard. You can select something that you want to delete and come up here and click the trash can, and that will delete the object. Or if you want a duplicate, instead of copying and pasting, you can select the object and come to the third icon, which looks like three boxes on top of each other. And if you click that, it makes a duplicate. Now in this case, you can't tell that because it puts the duplicate right in the same space. So I basically just moved it over so you can see that it did make a duplicate. Sometimes you need a duplicate sitting in the same space, so that's the tool to use to accomplish that. If you've made a design and you feel like something isn't in alignment and you want to get it in alignment, so I'm going to bring three boxes out here. You can hold Shift and select all three, which will cause all three of those objects to be selected and active. And above your area where you can change it from solid to whole, you have the two icons to group and ungroup, and then the third icon causes objects to be aligned. So if I click on that, it's going to turn on these little circular handles, and then by clicking on the circular handles, you let the computer know how you want these to align. So if I wanted these to align to their bottom plane, I could click this circle. Notice it's going to give me a preview of how those are going to align. When I click it, they're now aligned in this bottom plane. If I wanted them to align so that all three are stacked on top of each other, I could click this one, right? And it's showing me a preview of how they're going to stack. And so now they're all three in the same space aligned. You can also align things by using the grid. So distribute and align using the grid. If you want to turn the visibility off of something, you can select the object, and then the little shape palette will come up. And next to where you lock an object, there's a little light bulb. And if I click that, it will hide the object. Now it hasn't deleted the object. It's just temporarily hidden that object. To view that object again, this icon next to your grouping icons becomes available. That was there previously, but it was grayed out. Now it is dark, so that's letting me know that something's hidden. And if I click it, all objects that are currently hidden will be viewed. Let me delete these objects again. Next, I'm going to show you how you can mirror something. Now, I really need an object that is asymmetrical. So let me bring out this round roof tile. So if I wanted to make a mirrored copy of that, I can select the object by single clicking it, and then next to where your grouping and your aligning tools are, the last tool is the mirror tool. So it looks like two triangles with a line in between them. And if I click that, it will take the object and mirror it across an axis. So you have three axes that you can mirror it across. And so you click the tool and it shows you a widget with the three axes, and then you pick which axes you want it to mirror on by clicking the double arrow. And so now I basically mirrored it so that it is standing up with the curved part on the grid instead of previously the way that it was with the flat part on the grid. So I could come up and make a duplicate of this object by hitting the duplicate button, then come and hit the mirror, and then mirror it like that. And so I have two objects that are kind of interlocked in one another, and they're mirrored versions of one another. So once you get to the point where you have a design that you want to keep, basically Tinkercad will automatically store this project for you. But let's say that you want to output this. So to output it, up here above your basic tool shapes, there's an import, export, and a send to. So we'll talk about the send to and the import at some other time, but right now let's talk about the export. So you'd hit the export button. That will bring up a dialog box which will allow you to export to a printable format. So if you wanted to print to 3D printer, we're going to use this .stl format. That will open up a dialog box asking you to either open the file or save the file. We're going to want to hit save file and then hit OK. And that's going to save it to our downloads folder. So if you look in our downloads folder, we have a project1 test.stl. And if I double click that, it will open it up in preview, and you can see that object that we made. You'd be able to see it a little better if I'd given it a different color. But basically, that's what it would print like. So that's the intro to Tinkercad. There's certainly additional things that you can do, but that should get you started. If you want to go back to start a new project, you can come up here to the icon. Let me move this window over so you can see. You can come up here to the icon that is next to the word Tinkercad. So there's a little menu there, and click that, and it'll show you your recent designs that you've made. And then there's a new design button. So I could click the new design button, and that will open up a fresh work area, and I could start working on a new design. Or if I wanted to work on a design that I worked on previously, I can go to that little menu, and it'll show me my recent project. So I'll notice that project1 test is there, right? And I can hit the Tinker This button, and that will open up the file that we were just working on. So that's all for today. Have fun playing around in Tinkercad. Next, we're going to do a tutorial on how to use Tinkercad to make part of the first sculpture project that we're going to be working on.